over to Hermanus for a visit with my brother and his family tonight and tomorrow. And again, I want to take you along for the ride a bit. As I'm thinking about salt, I owe that second part to the discussion that I had on salt and blood and preservation of meat in Africa, because they go hand in hand. The issue of the I'm digging into the existence of the Mali Empire and the big salt empires, of which Mali was probably one of the most important ones in West Africa. And the economy was founded on salt. And the question is, what was the big consumption point for salt? Was it human consumption? And then if I was thinking about the markets in Lagos, because there's these street markets, the informal markets, which in Lagos across Nigeria is still predominant. It's not your big shopping malls. In fact, there's no big shopping malls. The big shopping malls are small shopping malls. There's only a handful in Lagos and in other cities as well. But the markets are still command a huge amount of people that goes there. And if I visited the salt vendors at many of these markets in Lagos, and if I look at the stock that they hold, yeah, it is a lot of salt, but it's not massive. And if I think about the human consumption of salt, humans can't eat a lot of salt. And then you're in an environment where people don't like a lot of salt, as in Africa. I think people knew about the salt technology associated with salt. But I don't think humans was the main driver, human consumption. I'm leaning in my research on the matter, in my inquiries, more towards agriculture. And in agriculture, the biggest driver will, of course, be animals. So it's very easy to see that people understood that animals want salt. Why? Because in antiquity they would have followed, the hunters would have followed the game, and they would have seen that the game go to salt pans and that they go and lick the salt. And animals have an instinctive craving for salt. They have a particular craving for salt. They know when they are salt deficient. Different from humans, we don't have that. We don't know when we lack salt. And the interesting thing is that animals, if cattle don't get enough salt, then the milk production is lower. They don't put on weight. They have all kinds of health-related issues. But the condition of the animals are poor. And so it's very important to have access to salt for your animals, and the ancients would have known that. And so if I think about the West Africa, just a very quick little calculation. If we say that animals on average needs about 1.7, 1.5, 2 kilograms of salt per month, and I take the combined West African herd of cattle, let's say by the 1700s, to be 1 million heads of cattle. Very quickly you get to a figure of monthly salt consumption of 250,000 tons, which then makes sense in terms of I don't have exact figures of the Mali Empire, but they exported in terms of salt, and but it makes sense in terms of the existence of an empire like Mali, that it could easily have been around there in those figures, and then it would have been something significant. But humans are not going to consume 250,000 tons, 25 million kilograms of salt in a month. That would need some industrial application for that. And animals, within the animal context, it makes a lot of sense. So salt, I need to dig deeper into this thing and do more research on this, but so far it looks like a productive line of inquiry. And if I use the contemporaneous Nigerian markets as an example for how much salt would be on a market, if I even would combine all the markets in Lagos, and I've been to most of them, and I've looked at the salt that's sold at most of them, it doesn't nearly come to something of the magnitude that you would need to drive something like the Male Empire. So that is on salt consumption. It just doesn't make sense to me if the application was only human. And then in terms of the meat preservation, even if they, I must do the sum, but if you use 2% salt in meat, it is a lot. It's a high salt percentage. And then if you use 3%, and I think the dried meat that was traded across the region of West Africa would have been the biltong type of dried meat, kilishi as it's called in Nigeria, or suya, which is closely related to kilishi. As I explained, the groundnut cake is used in the drying process and not necessarily salt. Now there may have been salt added, but to aid in the process. But the unchanging thing is not the salt, it is the groundnut cake that we have to this day. Kilishi is actually sweet. It's more like jerky than it is to biltong, which is a lot more salt than biltong, the dried meat from South Africa. So the need for the cattle to have to consume salt is a far better option. And then if we look at the Hallstatt civilization of the Celtic of the Celts, and the Salzburg, where I think the fact that Europe uses salt, eats salted meat, I think it came from there. That they, with their culture, spread their practice of using salt. So Christa Berger from Austria, who's became an acquaintance of mine, and she keeps on giving me very interesting information about Hallstatt and about salt and about the development of the Celtic culture. She just recently sent me loads of information of that, and also the link with the Turfan depression, which I will speak to in a minute about, a little bit about that. She's helping me with tremendous amount of information on all these fronts. But what happened is that they discovered these massive curing vats in Hallstatt, and they then calculated, and pork was cured there, and they calculated that the region would not have been able to sustain pork farming at the level that you would need to fill those vats and cure the meat. And so that brings an interesting question, and it seems as if home industry, almost in terms of curing and preserving meat, became industrialized. And the question is, what was the vector, what was the driving force for that development to take place? So obviously the salt mine itself, there can be little doubt that the owners of the salt said, that the people with vested interest said, we need to exploit this further, and we have this amazing commodity, the salt, and we need to find other ways that the salt can be used, or we have this, why don't we use this to cure pork? in vast quantities, because you would think who's got enough salt to do it on that scale and to take a chance with this. And then secondly, what was the reason for this? Was there what was the driver that caused them to want to even do this, for there to be a market? So Krista, these are all fascinating things that I would love to delve in with you and see what was happening around the time when those curing baths were in operation. What was happening in the culture? What was happening in the region? Which wars was being fought at that point in time? Was there a need to feed an army at some point? It sounds as if it was a solution to something, but what was that? What was the question that they answered with this industrial scale of curing the pork? You see, that's the question. It's the same question that I ask about West Africa in terms of the use of salt for animals, for example. Now, what was the driving force? Who was the person? Is it possible for us to know the name of the individual responsible for really figuring this thing out of the value of salt in animal production? What was the price of salt at the markets, at the street markets in West Africa at the beginning of the Christian era, at the end of the Christian era, and how did that change over the next few hundred years to the 1700s and the 14, 15, 16, 1700s, the time of the Mali Empire? How did that change? What was the price in Mali of salt? I've been reading a fascinating book on the history, the old history of Timbuktu. And the caravans would go from Timbuktu to a city not too far from there where salt was mined in the Sahara. And they would trade meat, blocks of dried meat, and all kinds of other commodities for salt. Some of the salt they had to buy with money, but a lot was bartered. What was the going price? Would that price have been something that the average citizen would be able to afford? Meat was not at the price that the average person could necessarily afford it. The wealthier people consumed meat more frequently. And so the same question that I have about the cults and about Hallstatt is the same question that I have about West Africa. But that these are two different societies that handled the matter of salt completely different, that is for sure. In the Hallstatt society, they incorporated this on a wholesale level into meat curing. And the form of curing the meat was predominantly with salt. And the same type of technology was in place in Turkey and in those nations around the Black Sea. Now, I think what was happening there is, I think it seems to me as if the Hallstatt civilization had links. Well, we know for a fact they had links with Turpan because of very delicate embroidery that we found, well, that was found on one of the garments worn by somebody in Turpan. And that same garment, that same stitch was found in the salt mines in Salzburg in Austria. How fascinating is that? Because I think it was in Turpan, in the Turpan Depression in Asia Hither, as it was called, by Binkelt and Kolani, who did the groundbreaking study on this many years ago, who said that curing was developed in Asia Hither. And in the Turpan Depression, which I think is the location where this happened. Why do I say that? Because there's other evidence the culinary history of that region is not well documented. But what is well documented is other uses of saltpeter, which is one of the reactive nitrogen species, NO3, and it was a cure for heart disorder, for blood flow disorder, and I'll do a separate talk on that. But the fact is that I think because nitrite salts is available in vast quantities in that depression, the Turpan depression, and it is found on the top surface, which is different from for example the Atacama Desert, where it is found not on the top. It's a layer down from the top. So in the Turpan depression, it is on the ground, and so you have the saltpeter on the top surface, and that was traded along with sal ammoniac, which was available, that came from the mountains surrounding the Turpan depression, and that was traded into Europe. But it seems as if the salt magnates in Austria, in Hallstatt, as if they had this very sophisticated network with other related salts, definitely with the Turpan community, which is fascinating. And the community in Turpan were related to the Scythians from the Russian steppe, and people who settled at the end of the day around the Black Sea in the parts of Russia, in the Ukraine, in Hungary, and places like that. And so these places, it's interesting that all these places, Poland, very strong salt culture. So it seems as if from very early on, it was not just salt, it was nitrite salts. That curing was discovered, that if you cure with salt only long enough, this pinkish reddish color will start to develop, and the meat will last very long if that happens. And so one of the things that people discovered is that bay salt is particularly suited for this. Okay, of course, bay salt was not traditionally boiled. It was sea salt was boiled, but what was called bay salt was not boiled. It was just the seawater was placed into baths, and solar evaporation was used. And what was discovered, I came across the most amazing work on the subject. The most amazing work. Because there's certain bacterial species. There's bacteria, which becomes the drivers then for the curing process. It is like inoculating your meat with starter culture if you use bay salt. It's fascinating. And so but it seems as if the people who understood salt technology, they not just only understood salt technology, but they actively exploited it to incorporate it and to create a market for it. You see what I'm saying? I'm saying this in terms of the Hallstatt community. They created technology. The community in Hallstatt they used their most valuable resource, and they developed other industries around that. The curing industry, notably. They took home industries and industrialized the process. And it's the same thing that happened in the Mali Empire. They took a resource that they have, and they industrialized it, and they organized it, and they developed related technologies to that. But the related technologies that they developed differs from the related technologies that was developed in the Hallstatt community. You see my point? Because if meat curing is not a widespread practice in Africa, as it is, and if dried meat was not predominantly produced with salt, as was the case, if they used other components such as the cake from groundnut cakes from the oil after the oil was extracted, instead of salt to aid with the drying, or with a little bit of salt added, they went a different way with it. The point is that even in South Africa, so the existence of salt bush of different vegetation that had high salt content was known not just in South Africa but across Africa, and not even their ash was particularly favored for rolling meat in. And nor was the fact that ash was used to roll the meat in before the time universally practiced in Africa. It's all fascinating, but there's these two big lines of difference that I think we can draw in Africa and with, for example, the Mali Empire, and which was big in salt production, and that from the Hallstatt Celtic community, where salt curing on industrial scale was definitely part and parcel of what they came up with. And Africa did not follow the same trajectory. Very interesting, fascinating stuff. So that's my little next 20 minutes on salt.